everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. McMurry GSA and ACU Voice is really proud to present Justin Lee here to talk tonight. We'd like to just remind you all that we're going to be recording, and so during the question and answer, anything you say might be picked up by the camera, so just keep it a little quiet.
Don't give them your real name.
Yeah, keep it clean. GSA.
We'll try.
I'm going to assume that clapping was for me and not for Keep It Clean, GSA. Well, hello, my name is Justin Lee, and I am not very good at standing still while I talk, so the camera's going to have to put up with me moving all around. I apologize in advance for that, but I'm not really that sorry. You have to work. So right off the bat, there are a couple of things that you should know about me. The first one is that I am a committed Christian. My background is Southern Baptist. Please don't judge me. These days I call myself more of a non-denominational evangelical Christian, which some of you may relate to, and some of you that may grate on every last nerve that you have, and so I apologize. But my faith is at the center of my life. It is the most important thing about who I am, and it's a big part of why I'm here tonight. The other thing that we should just get right out of the way about me is that, yes, the rumors you've heard are true. I am, in fact, bald. I know, it's funny. That's okay. I mention this only because a lot of folks seem to be under the misimpression that I am unaware of this fact, and that if it were to come up in conversation, I would be horribly offended. And so it's just good to get it out of the way at the beginning. I mean, I used to wait tables, and I sometimes would have a family at a table with a young child, and invariably the child, when I approached the table, would say, "Mommy, Daddy, that man doesn't have any hair." And then the parents would invariably respond with, "Shh," like it's a big secret or something. Like, "Don't tell him. He's not supposed to know." Like it's the emperor's new hair or something like that. I paid a lot for this weave, and then it doesn't really exist. No, it's true. I actually have a genetic autoimmune disorder called alopecia areata. I lost my hair for the first time when I was 4 years old, and this is true. See, that's me. And I wore a lot of hats back then. My head got cold, and it still does. So I actually really like Texas because it's nice and warm here. But yeah, so my hair comes and goes, so I just keep my head shaved. I don't have any eyebrows or anything, which at some point people notice, and then it freaks them out, and so I just wanted to get that out of the way. And then, of course, as soon as people find out that my immune system doesn't like my hair and I have no eyebrows, then, you know, the next question is always the same, and I'm not embarrassed. I don't mind telling you that, yes, people do, in fact, confuse me for Whoopi Goldberg. And it's embarrassing when people approach me on the street and say, "Hey, I loved you in Sister Act," and I have to then, as gently as possible, say to them, "Thank you, what would you like for me to autograph?" And so we're here actually to talk about a serious subject, so I should probably say that that last piece is not true, in fact, but everything else that I've just said is true. And part of what I do for a living is I talk to people about sexual orientation, gender identity, sexuality issues as a Christian, and what this means for those of us who are Christians. How many of you in the audience tonight self-identify as Christians, if you don't mind? How many of you don't identify yourselves as Christians? Okay, so we've got a few non-Christians in the audience. So let me just say, I'm going to not assume that everyone here is a Christian, since not everyone is a Christian, but I will apologize in advance to those of you who are not Christians that a lot of the stuff I'm going to say is going to be about Christians. But I think this is also very relevant to folks who are not Christians, who have Christians in their lives, and everybody I know in America knows Christians. So I am a Christian and I'm speaking as a Christian, and one of the things that bothers me is that these days the church has a not very good reputation. I don't know if you've noticed this or not. There's a famous study that was done just a few years ago by a Christian organization called the Barna Group. And the study was to see what young Americans today think about the church. And so they interviewed Americans between the ages of 16 and 29. And they asked them what they thought that would best describe modern-day Christianity. And they focused on two groups. A group that they called the churchgoers. These are active church-going young people. And a group they called the outsiders. So non-Christians who are not going to church. By the way, I don't mean to suggest that everybody who doesn't go to church is a non-Christian, but this is how they were defining outsiders. Folks who are not Christians and are not going to church. And so they said, they gave this group a whole bunch of different terms. Good terms, bad terms, things like teaches good values, gives hope, it's relevant, it's loving. Negative terms like it's hypocritical, it's judgmental, it's out of touch. And they asked these young people which term or terms they would apply to modern day Christianity. Out of all of these terms, wow, that thing is just kind of off the, it's not quite centered, is it? Oh, I apologize. Well, there's more over there in case you knew. Anyway, so out of all of the terms that were available to them, they did not pick any of these. In fact, the number one term that these young folks chose to represent modern-day Christianity was anti-gay. This is true. Actually, on the survey, it was actually anti-homosexual, but for our purposes, they'll say anti-gay. It's got a lot fewer syllables. This was the number one response of today's young people when describing the church. In fact, 91% of young people outside the church describe the church as anti-gay. 91%. You can't get 91% of people to agree on anything on a survey like this. I sometimes think if you asked people if the sky is blue, that you wouldn't get 91% of people to agree. Well, it's actually kind of gray today, I don't think. The smog here in LA, you know. Of the active church-going Christians, 80% describe the church as anti-gay. That's 4 out of 5. That's the number of dentists who recommend the recommended brand. So, if you are a Christian and you care about Christianity and our culture, this should bother you. It bothers me. And the reason it bothers me is that I think whatever theological position you hold on topics like same-sex marriage or the morality of a gay relationship or any of that sort of thing, my hope is that all of us can agree that we don't want the church to be predominantly known for being anti-gay. We would like to be known first and foremost for the gospel, because the gospel is what it's about. Which doesn't mean that everything we say is going to agree with everybody in the culture, but we would like for the gospel message to be the thing that stands out more than anything, and apparently that's not the case. And so we've got young people who are growing up in a world that is increasingly gay positive, and they're seeing the church as increasingly anti-gay, and then they're asking themselves, if my best friend is gay, do I have a place in this church? Does my friend have a place in this church? And what does this mean? And do I believe in this Christianity stuff anymore? So there are important questions for us to ask about all of this. Now, let me tell you a little bit about my story. I grew up, as I said, Southern Baptist, conservative Christian, and my nickname in high school, courtesy of a fellow classmate, was God Boy. I was the kid with the Bible in his backpack, ready to witness to anybody who was ready to listen, and some who were not as well, and really ready to preach at anybody about any issue on which I thought Christians ought to have an opinion. Some of you may have known when you were in school that really obnoxious kid who wouldn't shut up about his faith. That was me. I apologize. Some of you may have been that kid, in which case, hey. New friends. But on the subject of homosexuality, I felt like it was a pretty clear-cut issue. I believed in loving the sinner and hating the sin. First time I ever really had to deal with the issue was when my sophomore year of high school, some students put up a poster in the hall which said, a call to arms, and then said, "It has come to our attention that there are fags and dykes in this school." And it continued on into some rather predictable hate speech, some not so subtle references to violent acts to rid the school of the gay students. And this created some major ripples throughout our little high school community. The administration tore the poster down, but not before a lot of folks had seen it. And so that evening, a group of 6 students went home and they typed up a brochure of their own in response to this poster. They called it an armed response. And they came back to school the next day with this brochure that said, "We believe that there is nothing wrong with being gay and that we should love and support our gay peers at school. And if you're gay, you are okay. And if your friends are gay, they are okay. And there's nothing wrong with it." They began circulating this brochure, and they were promptly suspended by the principal. Now, they were suspended because there was a rule on the books that said you could not distribute literature without prior approval of the administration. And they hadn't known this. Nobody had known this, because as far as I know, no one had ever been suspended for this rule before. But you can imagine the sort of hubbub that this created in the local media and in the school, because if there's anything that students hate more than controversies about, well, I mean, students love controversies, but if there's anything that gets students more riled up than controversies, it's having their free speech curtailed. And so the students were not happy about the free speech issue, and students were very divided about the question of homosexuality. And my friends who knew that I was God Boy came to me and said, "What do you think about this whole thing?" And I said, "Well, you know, I disapprove of that poster. I think it's wrong. As a Christian, I believe it's wrong to use that kind of hate speech. I believe it's wrong to incite violence against other students. As a Christian, I believe very strongly in that. But as a Christian, I also don't approve of this brochure going around that says it's okay to be gay, because I believe it's a sin to be gay. I think the Bible's clear about it, and I'm not trying to be homophobic or unloving in saying so. I just feel it's my responsibility to say that God has a better way, that God designed male and female for each other, and that's what I need to tell people if I love them. Not because I hate them, but because I love them. I need to tell them the truth." And my friend said, "Well, that's homophobic." And I said, "Well, I don't think it is, but it's what I believe. It's my faith." I felt like that was pretty much the end of it, and it probably would have been the end of it, and I wouldn't be standing here talking to you if it weren't for one more thing. And that is that what I couldn't tell my friends in that moment was that I had a secret. When I first hit puberty, and all my guy friends were starting to notice girls for the first time, you know, really notice them. Like they used to have cooties, and then all of a sudden they had boobs, and am I allowed to say boobs? I know, right? That's the funniest thing I'm going to say all night. Just telling you right now. When my friends were starting to notice girls for the first time, I was going through the same kind of physical changes that they were, but I was starting to notice the guys for the first time. And I didn't know what to do because I wasn't prepared for that. I knew that I was going to go through puberty. I knew that I was going to start to find women attractive, only I wasn't starting to find women attractive. I was starting to find my male peers attractive, and it terrified me. But at first I thought, you know, this is just some weird phase that I'm going through, and I'm just not going to think about it. I'm going to stay focused on my schoolwork and my faith and my family and doing the things I'm supposed to do as a Christian, and I'll grow out of it. I used to listen to James Dobson, Focus on the Family, all the time, and Dobson had said that teenagers go through a period of sexual confusion, and so I thought, well, that's what I'm going through. It's a period of sexual confusion. But as I got older, these feelings didn't go away. They just kept getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And I would try my best not to think about anything to do with sex during the day, and then I would go home and go to bed at night, and I would have dreams about guys, and I didn't know what to do about that. I would wake up feeling disgusted with myself and thinking something was horribly wrong with me, but I didn't know how to change it. It got to the point that I was literally crying myself to sleep every night, begging God, please don't let me feel this way anymore. I can't take it. Please don't let me feel this way anymore. And I had faith that God was going to take these feelings away. I just didn't know how soon it would be, and I really, really wanted it to be very soon. It wasn't until I was 18 years old that it occurred to me for the first time that there was a word for guys who were attracted to other guys, and that word was gay. Up until that point, I considered myself straight. I dated girls. I didn't tell anybody that I had these secret attractions to guys because I was terrified of what they would think if they knew, and I knew that I was going to grow out of it eventually, and so I didn't want anybody to know. This was the secret I was going to take to my grave. And at 18, when I finally made this connection that, oh my gosh, this is what people mean when they say gay, it was, on one level, horrifying, but on another level, it was this tremendous sense of, well, it's like if you've ever had some weird medical symptom, and no doctor can explain to you why you have this symptom. Nobody can explain why you have this pain or what's going on, and you go to doctor after doctor after doctor, nobody can explain it, and then finally somebody says, I know what you have. There's a name for this. There's a diagnosis. I can give you a diagnosis. Even if it's the worst diagnosis in the world, there's some sense of relief at going, finally, I know what's happening. I know what's going on. I'm not a crazy person. I'm not the only one who's ever experienced this. And that's what gay was for me. It was a diagnosis. It was like, there used to be an old Dick Van Dyke show, Diagnosis Murder. This was Diagnosis Gay, was what it was. Starring Neil Patrick Harris, I guess. I don't know. Really? Diagnosis Gay gets like a little chuckle, and then Neil Patrick Harris, that's the cheer? Okay. For me, this was a diagnosis, and it was, I thought, a horrible diagnosis, but it was a relief to finally have a word for what I felt. And so I thought, now that I have the diagnosis, I just need to find the cure. And so I got involved in groups that are known as ex-gay ministries, Christian groups that offered to help gay people become straight. And for lack of time, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. If you want to know, I'll have some time for questions at the end. I'm happy to talk about it. But the short version is, not only did it not work for me, but it didn't work for anybody that I met in these ministries either. I met a lot of the who's who of the ex-gay movement at the time, the big leaders, the national leaders of the movement, and I met so many folks whose personal testimonies were out there on Christian radio and in Christian magazines, and people who were traveling to churches and saying, I walked out of homosexuality, and they were married to the opposite sex, and I would sit down with them one-on-one and say, so have you become straight? And they would say, well, no. And I would say, well, are you attracted to the opposite sex? And they would say, well, not really, not the way that people think. And I would say, well, are you attracted to the same sex? And they would say, yes. And as we talked about it, it became obvious that they had exactly the same feelings I did, and they were wrestling with them day after day after day. They just didn't talk about it anymore. They just didn't tell anybody. And I said, well, how come it doesn't say that in your personal testimony? How come, everybody out there thinks that you've become straight because you're married to this person of the opposite sex and you've got 2 kids? And sometimes they would be very honest to talk about the fact that sex was difficult for them. Some of their relationships, their marriages were in turmoil. It was a challenge. And I said, how come none of this is in your testimony? And they would say, listen, you have to understand, Justin, the folks out there in the church, they don't get people like us. They don't understand what we go through. And if they knew the truth, they would never accept us. And so, you know, sometimes you don't have to share your whole testimony. And that angered me because I thought, look, if there's anything the church should stand for, it's honesty. I believe in being honest. And if this is a temptation I'm going to face for the rest of my life and that's how I need to consider it, then I'm still going to be honest about it because I'm not going to lie. And if I have to fight this temptation every day, that's what I'll do, but I'm not going to lie. So I began writing about this on the internet and trying to figure out what I was supposed to do. Had I misinterpreted the Bible? Was there room for me to someday fall in love with somebody of the same sex? Was I supposed to fight this every day as a temptation and live a celibate life? What was God asking me to do? And when I turned to my Christian friends and family and pastors and other folks I respected, the response I got largely from the church was just ostracism. People saying, well, just don't be gay. Just don't feel what you feel. And I had said, I don't know how to not feel this. What I need to know is what to do about it. And nobody had any answers for me, other than, oh, well, you should talk to so-and-so from the X-Gay ministry. He's become straight. And I would think in my head, well, no, he hasn't, because he just told me. So it was frustrating. And as I began writing about my experiences online, I started hearing from dozens and then hundreds and then thousands of other Christians in the same boat saying, I don't know who to talk to about this, I'm struggling, I'm suicidal, I'm depressed, it's hurting my faith and I don't know what to do. And I thought, we need to talk about this, we need to be honest about this in the church. Because whatever conclusion we come to about the morality of same-sex relationships, we at least need to be honest about the temptations and the attractions that we're feeling. That ultimately led to the creation of an organization called the Gay Christian Network, which I am now the executive director of. And it was an organization that said, regardless of our theological disagreements on this issue, we're going to come together as Christians to discuss these issues. And in spite of the name, not everybody involved is a gay Christian. There are lots of straight Christians involved as well, lots of bi Christians, lots of trans Christians. But we talked about two views on sexual morality. And we got the terms side A and side B from an organization called Bridges Across the Divide. We didn't come up with those, but we found them really helpful for talking about these two views. So Christians on side A believe that gender is not the deciding factor in whether a relationship is moral or immoral. Or if you're looking at this screen, that gender isn't the deciding factor. So Christians on side A would say, look, there are lots of reasons why a relationship might be moral or immoral. And we need to talk about things like monogamy and faithfulness and commitment and love and consent and all these kinds of things. And these are important. But gender doesn't tell us whether the relationship is moral or immoral. A relationship between a man and a woman could be moral or immoral. A relationship between two men could be moral or immoral. A relationship between two women could be moral or immoral. That's what side A says. Side B says that no, gender does matter. God designed sex to be between a man and a woman, and sex outside of those boundaries is outside of God's plan for us. It's not appropriate, it's not what God wants for us, and it is sinful. And many Christians on side B, most Christians on side B, I think, would add within the confines of marriage, that sex is for marriage and marriage is between a man and a woman. So these two views both exist within the church, and many of us at GCN were wrestling with which view we had. And some of us came to a side A conclusion, some came to a side B conclusion, some went back and forth, some were undecided, but ultimately we said we all, on both sides, need a place to have conversations about these questions. So that leads me to tonight, because within this room, I imagine we have folks on side A and folks on side B and folks who are in the middle. And I'm not here to take a side and say you should agree with me and here's why. I could do that. I wouldn't change anybody's mind. You'd all leave believing exactly what you believed when you came in, and those of you who agreed with me would think I'd done a great job, and those of you who disagreed with me would think I had done a terrible job and would be very angry. I'm not interested in doing that. What I am interested in doing is talking to you about how we as Christians on both sides of this have found ways of having a more productive conversation. Because one thing that I've found is that Christians on both sides overwhelmingly agree that the church could do a better job than we've done at loving and welcoming and caring for the folks in the church who are LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender folks. And so what I want to talk to you about is 10 practical things that all of you can do to have conversations that are more productive on this within the church. Number one, if we're going to have a productive conversation, we need to agree what a conversation is. Now, you would think we all know what a conversation is, but one of the things that happens is sometimes we have folks who say, well, look, man, there are two different sides, and that's okay. Whatever you believe is okay. Whatever I believe is okay. We're all equally right, man. It's just like, you know, it's your opinion. Your opinion's just as valid as my opinion, and, yeah, man. There's a great scene in the film Fiddler on the Roof and the play Fiddler on the Roof where Tevye is listening to two folks argue over some point. And the first guy argues his point and Tevye says, he's right. And the second person argues the opposing point and Tevye says, he's right. And an onlooker says, wait a second, he's right and he's right. They can't both be right. And Tevye thinks for a minute and says, you know, you are also right. Do we actually believe everyone is equally right? You know, everybody's opinion is equally valid is a great approach if we're talking about what's your favorite ice cream flavor. If you're talking about your favorite ice cream flavor, your opinion is just as valid as mine. Unless you choose butter pecan, in which case you're wrong and you're going to hell. But on this issue, we're talking about important moral questions that for those of us who are Christians, they matter. For those who are LGBT, they matter. For those who care about somebody who's LGBT, they matter. We believe that these issues matter and that everybody is not equally right. If you are on side A, you think that the side B people in this room are wrong and that what they say and do is harmful. And if you are on side B, you believe that the side A people in this room are wrong and that what they say and do is sinful. And so it's important for us to acknowledge that we can't just sit in this room and just be all happy fuzzy and pretend that we all agree with each other. We do not. So then what's the solution? Okay, so we have a conversation where each of us fights for our own position. Side A folks argue for side A, side B folks argue for side B. We pull out the Bibles, we see who has the best argument, and we just battle it out. There's a word for that, a debate. I mean, if we're doing it in a civil way, it could be just, you know, a brawl otherwise, but I'm going to assume we're being civil. So we could have a debate. And maybe some of you came here tonight having no idea who I was or what we were going to talk about tonight and expecting that that's what you were going to get was a debate. Either that or me trying to convince you of my position and just sort of preaching at you. You know, sometimes people say, let's talk about this issue. And it's sort of like, you know, when somebody says, hey, we need to talk. And what they really mean is, hey, I want to talk. I want you to listen, right? But maybe, okay, so both sides get to talk and so we have a debate. We argue it out. But that doesn't really change anybody's mind, does it? I was talking to some folks last night, some of you were there, and I pointed out, if I am debating with you about this issue, you and I, one-on-one, we're just having a debate. The whole time I am making my brilliant theological, philosophical, biblical, constitutional, whatever argument. The whole time I'm making my brilliant argument, what are you thinking about? You're thinking about your rebuttal. You're thinking about all the holes in my argument that you can exploit as soon as I shut up and let you talk. And when you're making your brilliant argument that you're sure is going to change my mind, I'm not listening to you. I'm thinking about my rebuttal to you. And that's why people rarely change their minds in the middle of a debate. So this isn't particularly helpful if we want to have a conversation. What is helpful is to build relationships. And it's kind of counterintuitive sometimes to talk about building a relationship if we really secretly want to change each other's minds, because we do, right? We want to change each other's mind. If you think that somebody sitting next to you believes something that is wrong or sinful, then on some level you want to change their mind, right? And so it seems counterintuitive to focus on building a relationship, to focus on taking more interest in the person than in the position. And yet I would argue that that is exactly what enables us to change minds. This is exactly what makes us more effective at changing minds, when we take more interest in people than positions. Somebody who takes more interest in you than in your disagreement is your friend. Somebody who takes more interest in the disagreement and changing your mind than in you as a person is a salesperson. And when it comes right down to it, if you're going to change your mind about something, it's going to be because your friend said something to you and not because a salesperson did. So we need to have this kind of approach to conversation where we say, okay, look, I care more about you than about this disagreement, and so I want to take interest in you, and let's actually build a relationship and have the conversation come out of that. The second thing we need to do is learn the language. Here's what I mean by this. Particularly if you are a straight Christian, talking about these issues can be a bit intimidating at times. But I often say, you know, if you are going to witness to folks in a foreign culture, you're going overseas to some little country somewhere, one of the things I hope you would do before you get there is learn at least a little bit of the language and the culture of the folks you're going to be witnessing to. Because it's important to know, before you get there, if, say, thumbs up is an offensive gesture in this culture, that's something you would like to know before you go around saying, hey, God bless you, God bless you, God bless you, right? Important thing to know. And I talk often with Christians who really want to have a compassionate conversation with their LGBT friends and family members. And they say, look, I'm not here to condemn anybody. I want to be as loving as possible. And then they use terms that they don't know are offensive. And when I say to them, for instance, did you know that the term lifestyle, talking about the gay lifestyle, well, you know, my friend is living the gay lifestyle and I really want a way to talk to him. Did you know that most gay people consider the term lifestyle in that context to be very offensive? And they go, oh no, I was trying to be loving. I was trying to be specific about that it's not the fact that he's gay that I have a problem with, it's the lifestyle. And they don't know. And so this is an important thing to know. Or that the word homosexual is widely considered offensive when applied to a person. That most gay people would prefer to be called gay rather than homosexuals. And a lot of Christians aren't aware of this. And I go and I speak to groups and a lot of people are like, I had no idea. And the gay people in the audience are like, yep. There was a Christian news service a few years ago that on the internet that intentionally took news stories from the Associated Press and changed the word gay to homosexual in every story where it appeared. They had a computer that automatically did this and then reposted the stories, which, as you can imagine, was incredibly offensive to the gay community. And they knew this, and they did it anyway. But it did result in a little bit of humor, and this is, I promise you this is true, this is a real screenshot. When a sprinter named Tyson Gay I don't know if the camera can see this slide, so the headline is "Homosexual Eases into 100 Final at Olympic Trials." So it's important to learn the language of the folks you're speaking with. And this works the other way as well. If you are an LGBT person talking to folks in the church and maybe you're not from a church background, it's helpful if you know enough of the language of the church that you can talk to people on their terms and be able to have a conversation. It's also important when we talk about these terms to define the terms that we're using. So for instance, if I use a term like LGBT and you've never heard LGBT before, you may think that I'm talking about a somewhat delicious sounding sandwich. And And it's important for me to tell you that this means lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. And then I may need to explain what transgender means, or what bisexual means, or whatever. We can have a whole conversation about it. One of the terms that is often confused is the term gay. What does it mean if somebody says that they are gay? You know, typically, in my case, for instance, when I said that I realized at 18 that I was gay, I was not talking about any future decision to be in a relationship. I was not talking about any sexual behavior I was engaging in, because I wasn't engaging in any sexual behavior. For me, the word gay meant one thing and one thing only. I am attracted to other guys. And most gay people that I talk to, when I say, what does it mean to you when you say that you're gay? They say, well, it means I'm attracted to people of the same sex. And straight means somebody's attracted to people of the opposite sex. And yet, when I got involved in the ex-gay organizations, I found that within ex-gay communities, the term ex-gay, which gay people might then assume means I'm no longer gay, no longer attracted to the same sex. Ex-gay as a term didn't mean no longer attracted to the same sex. It usually meant I no longer use the word gay to identify myself, even though I am still attracted to the same sex. So if we don't define our terms, you can see very easily how this leads to a lot of confusion about what we're even talking about. We conducted a survey on Facebook. I've been doing this survey around the country, getting a lot of feedback from folks. We did this in Abilene. And one of the questions that we asked to get at this terminology question was, suppose you meet somebody and his name is John, and he's attracted to men. He's far more attracted to men than he is attracted to women. But he's married to a woman, and he's faithful to his wife. He's decided to stay faithful to his wife and not act on his same-sex attractions, but he does have them. What would you call him? What word would you use to describe someone who's attracted to the same sex, but married to a member of the opposite sex? And LGBT folks in Abilene who answered this question overwhelmingly said that he's gay or bi. And a lot of them commented, well, the question didn't specify to what extent he's attracted to women. So a number of people said, if he's attracted to only men, I would say he's gay. If he's attracted to men and women, then I would say he's bi. Overwhelmingly, this was the response. And then there were a good number of folks, about 22%, who said, I don't like to assign labels to other people. I reject the labels altogether, or I just don't like assigning labels to other folks. And then a few people had some other response. But the number one response from LGBT folks is this guy's gay or bi. Among straight conservative Christians who answered the question, the results looked a little different. 18% of straight conservative Christians in Abilene said he's straight. I have done this survey across the country. I get the same result. The numbers are a little different, but the same basic results every time. And after surveying something like 2,500 people, I can tell you that not a single time, ever, has any self-identified LGBT person said that he's straight. Never. They might say, I don't like to assign labels, but they never say he's straight. But a good chunk of conservative Christians do say he's straight. Only about a third called him gay or bi, and then a larger percentage had some other response. So part of what this says to us is that we're not even speaking the same language sometimes. If I think gay means somebody who's attracted to the same sex regardless of who he's married to, and you think gay means somebody who's having sex with a member of the same sex regardless of, whatever, then if we're talking about, say, is it a choice to be gay, or how should gay people respond to a situation, or whatever, we're not even talking about the same thing. And this is important for us to recognize. So this is why I say it's so critical that we define our terms right off the bat. It's also important that we distinguish multiple things which are often confused. When we talk about homosexuality, a lot of folks think, oh, well, we all know what homosexuality is. But there are actually 4 different things that homosexuality could be. We might be talking about somebody's orientation or attractions. Some folks would use the word temptation for orientation. Same thing, we're talking about who you find attractive to begin with. But then lust is separate from that. Just because I'm attracted to somebody doesn't mean I'm lusting after them, but it's very easy for attraction to turn into lust. When Jesus says not to lust after a woman because It's committing adultery in your heart. The Greek word he's using there, I lust, epithumeo, literally means to set the heart upon. I set the heart upon this woman who's not my wife. It's the same word that's used in the Greek translation of the Old Testament to translate the word covet, when God says, thou shalt not covet. You shouldn't covet a woman who's not your wife because that's committing adultery in your heart. But there's a distinction between that and being tempted by this person. You can't help noticing that the person is attractive, but you can help what your brain does with that. So orientation and lust are different things. And lust is sinful, I believe, as a Christian, for everybody, regardless of whether you're gay or straight or bi. Relationships are something different. A lot of times we talk about gay folks, and right away folks start talking about sex. We think about, well, you know, gay people, they have gay sex. But in fact, a lot of gay folks are more interested in a relationship, just like most straight folks, when they decide to get married, are more interested in, hopefully, the person than just the ability to have sex with this person. Most people don't get married just for the ability to have sex. They get married because they are in love with this person and they want to spend their life with them, and they have a lot of selfless desires to support this person and to be connected with them. And gay people who want same-sex relationships have the same things. Now, this does not mean that they are okay theologically. I'm not saying that. There's still a lot of conversation that we as a church have to have about whether or not we believe those relationships are okay. But it's important to distinguish the relationship from the sex and ask questions like, for instance, if it's sinful for me to have sex with somebody of the same sex, would it be sinful for me to have a close, committed relationship with this person that was non-sexual? Or is that splitting hairs? And why does that matter? Dementia runs in my family. My mom right now is suffering from dementia, and she probably would not be alive today if it weren't for the fact that my dad is there with her every day, caring for her. If she were in a nursing home or something like that, she wouldn't have been able to get the treatment that she needed because she has a very specific, very difficult disease. So I have to ask myself, what happens if, when I get to be my mom's age, I have the same thing happen to me, and I'm single? Who takes care of me? Who notices that I'm not myself and gets me the help that I need? There are a lot of reasons why relationships are important outside of sex. So these are questions that we need to talk about as a church, and we need to make sure when we talk about homosexuality, we're not just lumping it all together and then thinking that it's all the same as sex, because it's not all about sex. So I would encourage you, when this term homosexuality comes up, to strike it from your vocabulary. If what you really mean when you say, I don't approve of homosexuality is, I don't approve of gay sex, then say, I don't approve of gay sex. Or if what you really mean is, I don't approve of a romantic relationship between two people of the same sex, regardless of whether it's sexual, then say that. And if what we're really talking about is somebody's attraction, or who, you know, or how somebody identifies, or whatever, these are things that we should be clear about. Number 5. One of the things that's very important to tease these issues apart is to share our stories. We need to share our stories. And that means those of you who are LGBT, you have a story about how you came to identify that way. Those of you who are straight, you have a story about when this issue first came into your life and why you care about it. Whether you're on side A or side B, there's a reason that this matters to you. And it's important not only to share our stories, but to listen to others. How many of you have seen the film E.T.? Okay. Some of you are young. Anyway. Back when I was a boy, we were amazed by this film. So, those of you who have seen E.T., when you watch E.T., how do you feel about aliens and the idea of encountering an alien? It's a warm, fuzzy feeling, right? I mean, E.T. was cute and cuddly, and who wouldn't want to hang out with E.T.? So imagine there are actually aliens who come to Earth, and you're excited because you've seen E.T. and you're excited to meet these aliens, and you're talking to somebody who's like, oh no, I don't want anything to do with an alien. I don't trust them, I don't like them, whatever. Now, you could make all kinds of great theological arguments for why we should love all people, including aliens. You could make philosophical arguments for why everyone deserves to be treated a certain way. You could make legal arguments for why they ought to have the same rights that everybody else has, or whatever. But at the end of the day, if this person has never seen E.T., but they have seen War of the Worlds, or Independence Day, or the TV series V, and this is the image in their head when you talk about aliens, no argument you make is going to change their mind, because this is how they feel about aliens. In their minds, they see aliens and they think, pooh, pooh. This is the kind of image that some Christians have of LGBT folks, and this is the kind of image that some LGBT folks have of Christians. And so, if you are, say, a Christian who wants to reach out to LGBT people in your life, and they have this image of you, all the arguments and Bible discussion in the world is not going to make them want to talk to you anymore. But sharing your story and being vulnerable about your experiences as a Christian, and the things that you know and the things that you don't know, and how you came to the conclusions that you have, and all this kind of stuff, that may change folks' minds, and vice versa. I'm going to show you a trailer from a, oh, I have one more. Because, I know, right? Because who could hate E.T.? I mean, Drew Barrymore kissed him, so... Actually, considering some of the people Drew Barrymore's kissed, that may not be a great... But I want to show you a trailer. I want to show you a trailer because I want to give you an example of how we can talk about this issue in a way that's very personal. This is just 2 minutes long. This is a video, this is from a video that the GCN produced. And I'm happy to give you free copies of it if you would like. I have sign-up sheets on the back. If you will just give me your email address, then as soon as I get back, my office will send a bunch to Abilene and we'll email you and let you know where you can go pick them up. There's no catch here. The reason I'm getting email addresses is so that I can follow up with you this summer and just find out if you found it helpful and what other feedback you have on what's good about it, what's bad about it, what you would like to change. This is part of this grant that we've gotten that sent me here to talk to you. So that's that. But I'm going to show you this trailer. And by the way, for those of you going, wait a second, he's only on like 0.5 or 6. I promise I'm more than halfway through the presentation. The last few are quick. But I just want to show you this trailer really quick and give you a sense of this is how we can talk about this. And we don't have sound hooked up, so I'm just going to hold the mic up here. It's ghetto.
Christian when I was probably 7 years old. I don't remember the exact time, but I remember that I had truly accepted Christ as my personal Savior, that I had prayed the prayer, and that I truly believed it.
I knew that I had a void in my heart that couldn't be filled with anything else.
So I got really involved with that church and was involved with the youth group there. I was a youth leader, was president of the Christian club in high school.
Gay is wrong and you're going to hell. I was like, well, gay is wrong. You know, so why am I having these feelings? So I kept praying and praying and praying, and I would go to my bedroom and cry, like, you know, Lord, take this away, take it away.
And it honestly was something that I thought I'd never tell anyone about.
I was very dead set of, no, being gay is wrong. So I can't be gay, I'm not gay. That's a choice, I'm not gonna make that choice.
I started getting really depressed because, like, God doesn't like me, God hates me, I'm going to hell. And I didn't have anybody to talk to about it because I was afraid to. And he looked at me and he said, Rob, you'll probably always be gay. We can't change your feelings, but we can change your behaviors. And so that was very discouraging to me because I'm like, well, that's not good enough.
I felt uncomfortable talking to any other Christians about it because of how fearful my pastor seemed about the whole topic, and that made me afraid as well, afraid of rejection. And I kind of felt like I was a disease.
I know you've tried to change it, I know that it hasn't worked. But still, this is really something that I can't get my head around.
There's a lot of confusion on the part of the gay world
as to what it means to be a Christian, and there's a lot of confusion on the part of the church of what it means to be gay. And I think that there's so much confusion that no one has stopped and said, well, why don't we go ask them?
So like I said, you are welcome to have a copy of the DVD. My reason for showing you this isn't just to be like, hey, look what we made. But it is to say that hopefully you see that and you have a sense of this is a way to talk about this, by talking about personal stories, is a way to talk about this issue in a way that's not just so polarizing. Because ultimately this is about real people. And all of us as Christians, and all of us as people, I mean, we are here serving God as human beings, not as machines, not as Bible interpreting machines, but as people who experience the grace of God every day. And that's how Jesus related to people. And that's how we should relate to each other. And that leads us to a great, one of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Seek to understand, then to be understood. This isn't just Covey, though. Jesus had a similar approach, although he didn't say it in the same language. But when Jesus says the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If what I want is for other people to understand me and my perspective and what I believe, don't I owe it to them first to try to understand where they're coming from and to give them that generosity and that grace that maybe they haven't shown to me yet. But it's my responsibility to do so. Paul had the same approach. You remember when Paul goes into Athens, and he sees in Athens that they have a lot of altars. And he could go in sort of with theological guns blazing, don't you know this is an abomination unto the Lord? But he does not. He takes his time. And he says, you know, I've seen that you have all these altars, and I see that you are a very religious people. And I see that you have an altar to an unknown God, because they were afraid of offending a God by leaving them out. And he says, this God who is unknown to you, I would like to tell you about. And what he's done is he's demonstrated, I know something about you. I've taken the time to get to know you. And now, let me give you a chance to get to know me, get to know what I believe and what I stand for. And they receive him very well. I think perhaps would not have received him as well if he'd gone in with the theological guns blazing. Oh, this is now an intermission. Dee-lee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. Okay, here we go. Ta-da. You know, everybody is the protagonist of their own story. Nobody goes through life saying, I'm the villain. Maybe a few people do, but virtually nobody does. In movies, there's always the villain who's like, I am so evil, and I'm going to do evil things. And they always have the evil laugh. And in real life, people aren't like that. People see themselves as the protagonists of their own story. If you found out that this building was on fire, it was going to burn to the ground, and we were all about to be trapped inside, and you ran into this room to save us, and you said, the building's on fire, you've got to get out now. And your best friend or family member, the person you love more than anyone else in the world, is sitting in this room. And you run up to them and you say, you've got to get out, this building is on fire. And for some reason, they don't believe you, they ignore you, they don't leave, they think you're joking. And you're like, no, I'm serious, you've got to come with me. And they won't leave. And you know that you have precious little time left to get them out of this, or they're going to burn to death. How far would you go to get them out of this room? Pretty darn far, I imagine, if you really love this person. I mean, you would probably be willing to drag them kicking and screaming out of this room. You might be willing to hit them in the head and knock them out and drag them out by force if you had to They might hate you in the moment, but you could save their life. And wouldn't you do that if you knew that by doing that you could save their life? If you knew that by making them hate you for the moment, you could save their life? But suppose you're sitting in this room and you know that the building is actually not on fire. There's not any question about this. The building is not on fire. And a schizophrenic person runs in the room, convinced that the building is on fire, and starts shouting, "Ah!" and shouting about getting, you have to leave, ah! and starts trying to drag people by force out of the room. And assaulting them, hitting them in the head, knocking them unconscious, possibly killing them. Your perspective on the issue changes a bit, doesn't it? Everybody sees themselves as the protagonist of their own story, and everybody in that situation is doing what they think makes sense based on what they believe they know to be true. And yet here's this conflict. And so when we seek to understand and then to be understood, one of the things that we're doing is saying, okay, I believe that you're doing what you think is right, even though I think what you're doing is wrong. But I'm still going to take the time to try to understand where you're coming from, because if I understand that this crazy person who's coming and assaulting people is trying to get us out of the room because he thinks the building's on fire, that makes a little more sense. And then maybe I could try to figure out why he thinks the building is on fire, and we can deal with that, rather than just go, this person is an insane person. So, on this survey, as we seek to understand and then to be understood, I found that there were a lot of things where we don't see eye to eye. I talk often with members of the LGBT community, and they talk about how frustrated they are with Christians. And they say, look, I just don't like dealing with Christians. And I press them on this. Is it really all Christians who drive you crazy? And sometimes they'll say, yes, it's just all Christians, I'm sick of Christians. And sometimes they'll say, well, it's not really all Christians, it's the Christians who think that homosexuality is a sin. What they really mean is what I was calling side B Christians. And I say, well, why is it that side B Christians drive you so crazy? Is it really just the fact that they have a belief that you don't share? Because surely there are a lot of people in America who disagree with you on things, that they don't drive you crazy. And there are a number of reasons. But a lot of it, when they talk about family members and friends who are side B Christians, who they have difficulty getting along with, a lot of it comes down to they don't feel understood. I said, well, what do you think they don't understand? And so I was curious to know whether some of the things that a lot of LGBT folks don't feel understood about, how those things are viewed by, say, side B Christians in Abilene. So for instance, one of the questions I asked on this survey was, do you think people have control over whether they are gay or straight? Is it a matter of choice? Can you choose whether you're gay or straight? Now, folks in the LGBT community overwhelmingly say, look, we didn't choose to be LGBT. Gay people say we didn't choose to be gay. When we asked straight Christians on side B in Abilene, overwhelmingly they agreed that this is a matter of choice, that people have control over whether they're gay or straight. Only less than 20% disagreed. Or for instance, do you think some people are born gay? Straight side B Christians overwhelmingly said no. Less than 1/10 believe that some people are born gay. Overwhelmingly they say, no, I don't think people are born gay. By contrast, when we ask LGBT folks the same question, they overwhelmingly agree. Overwhelmingly. Now, what's my point in saying this? My point in saying this is not to say that people are or aren't born gay. I don't know why people are gay. I can theorize about it, but it would be my theories, and that's not worth a hill of beans to you. My point here is, whether or not you think people are born gay, there's a huge disconnect here between what side B Christians think and what LGBT folks think on this issue. And so when we're talking to each other, we're, again, not speaking the same language and not talking about the same things. We've made these assumptions and we don't agree with each other on some of the basic core assumptions. Like, for instance, if someone is gay and doesn't want to be, is there hope for them to become straight? Can gay people become straight? Straight side B Christians in Abilene overwhelmingly say yes. And I just heard some response from some of the LGBT and allied students here. I can tell you, everywhere I go, when I speak to LGBT groups specifically, and I show these kinds of results from their community, there's just shock and horror. Because they're like, but? Because overwhelmingly LGBT folks say, look, gay people can't become straight. Or what about, is it a sin to be gay even if you don't have sex? Now this one, this is a really intentionally provocative question because if we say it's a sin to be gay even if you don't have sex, and if we agree that gay means somebody who's attracted to the same sex, what you're saying is just by virtue of the temptations you experience, you're already sinning, whatever you do about them. Just because of your attractions, you're already sinning against God. Which is a horrible thing to say to somebody who's trying to live as God wants them to live. And that's how a statement like this would come across to LGBT Christians. And so I was curious to know if anybody would actually say this. And over half of the straight side B Christians in Abilene agreed. Now, do I think that these folks are intending to say to people, no matter what you do, you're already sinning against God? No, I think what they meant is that lust is a sin, or that if you choose to follow a sinful path, that that's a sin. But this is where defining terms comes in. And this is where, when I say it's important for us to define what we mean by gay, this is why it's important for us to define what we mean by gay. Because we don't mean the same thing here. Oops. So again, looking back to the slide that I was showing you earlier, if we don't agree on what gay means, we're going to end up not speaking each other's language. So a few more quick things, and then I'm going to shut up and let you ask questions if you would like. It's important for all of us to be aware of what LGBT folks say about questions about choice and change. These are big issues, and if we can't agree on whether or not people chose to feel what they feel, then it's hopeless for us to start talking about theology. If you say, I didn't choose to do this, and I say, yes, you did, then essentially I'm calling you a liar, and then that shuts down conversation. So if somebody says to me, I didn't choose this, it's important for me to be understanding of that and say, okay, help me understand what you did experience and what you're feeling, and go from there. And this question of change, of becoming straight, is a complicated question, to be honest. Not everybody's experience is the same. But you know, let's say we take something that we all agree is bad, like cancer. We all think cancer is bad. Do I think God has the power to heal somebody of cancer? Sure. Does that mean that if somebody has cancer and everybody prays for them and then God doesn't heal them, that God doesn't exist, or that people didn't have enough faith, or whatever? I don't think so. Justin, you shouldn't compare being gay to cancer. I know, but I'm allowed to because I'm gay. No, it's a bad idea. That's a terrible analogy. If you're straight, don't ever compare being gay to cancer. Only gay people can do this. Gay people, that means if you hear anybody in this room compare being gay to cancer, that means they're gay. On both sides, we must respect each other's conscience. Now, notice I said respect. I didn't say that you have to agree with the person's theological views. But you need to respect that this other person is, in their minds, the protagonist of their own story. They are doing what they believe is right. And if they are wrong, they're sincerely wrong. This is true on both sides. So whoever you are, whatever you believe, the people in this room who disagree with you are sincere. And they are doing what they believe what their conscience is telling them to do, what they believe God is telling them to do, or what they believe is the right thing to do. As Christians, we've always had disagreements. They go back to the earliest church. Paul writes about a major disagreement in the early church about eating meat that had been sacrificed to idols in Romans 14, and he says, "Accept the one whose faith is weak without quarreling over disputable matters. The one who eats everything must not treat with contempt the one who does not, and the one who does not eat everything must not judge the one who does. You then, why do you judge your brother or sister, or why do you treat them with contempt? For we will all stand before God's judgment seat." Now, Paul's not saying it doesn't matter, that theological questions like this don't matter, but what he's saying is ultimately you have to be responsible for living out what you believe God has called you to do. And I can still think that you're wrong, but I'm still going to love you. My good friend, Baptist author and minister Tony Campolo, has a great quote that I like. I've heard him say it so many times, I can't say it without launching into my Tony Campolo impression. And I know this is going to end up on the internet, and then he's going to see it, and then he's going to be offended by my impression of him. But he says this, he says, I'm sorry, Tony. He says, you know, I often hear people say, you don't understand, Tony, I love the sinner, but I hate his sin. And I say, that's interesting, because that's the opposite of what Jesus said. Jesus never said, love the sinner, but hate his sin. Jesus said, love the sinner and hate your own sin. Again, I apologize, Tony. That's terrible. I actually really like that quote, though, because what Tony's getting at there is that God calls each of us ultimately to live according to what we know to be true, even if others don't agree with us. And so my ultimate goal when I go to Scripture is not to find all the things that I can tell everybody else that they're doing wrong, but to find all the ways that the Spirit is convicting me, all the ways that I need to improve my life. And when I deal with the folks who are living in sin in all sorts of ways, who are being judgmental, who are engaging in sexual sin, who are doing whatever, my responsibility is to love them the way Jesus loved them and to take a personal interest in them. 2 final points. 1, remember, when we're talking about this, I already am gay. This is not a debate about whether or not I should be gay. I tried very hard not to be gay, and I am. The question is, how do I live now as a Christian, given that I'm gay? That is, given that I'm attracted to the same sex. What's the future look like for me? And this is the question that we need to have for anybody who's LGBT. And finally, on both sides, we must emphasize our friendship over agreement. This is a point that my friend Ron, who disagrees with me, actually, on the theological questions that we often debate, added to my slide, to my slides when we did a presentation at Pepperdine. And I really like this, emphasize friendship over agreement. That ultimately, you and I may disagree, but we can still be friends. We can still love and see each other as we are. Again, that's how Jesus treated people. When Jesus meets the woman at the woman at the well who's had 5 husbands, and he's talking to her about, well, you've had all these husbands, and now the one you're with now isn't even your husband, and all this stuff. I don't hear him saying that in a judgmental way. He obviously disapproves of a lot of what she's done in her life. But he's saying, look, I know you. I care about you as a person. I'm not here to preach at you. I'm here to be somebody who cares and who knows you. And I think over and over we see Jesus surrounded by sinners. After all, we're all sinners. And yet treating people as people. Not treating people as, that's the guy who lusts too much, that's the woman who's had 5 husbands, I'm not even going to talk about what he did last night, These are God's people, these are God's children, and I love them. And I think that's how we're called to respond to each other. I think if we do those things, it's not going to solve all the questions. It's not going to answer for us some of the big debates in the church on this issue, but it will allow us to have productive conversation and to listen to one another and to learn from one another and to seek God together. You're welcome to check out more resources from the Gay Christian Network, which I work for, at gaychristian.net. You can also check out my various blogs and tweets and Facebooks and whatever at those addresses. I also have a book coming out, which my publisher would kill me if I didn't mention, called Torn, Rescuing the Gospel from the Gays versus Christians Debate, which is coming out in November, so you can pre-order it now on Amazon.com. That's all I have, and I'm happy to take some questions in the little time we have left, if you have questions. Yeah?
You said earlier you were going to talk get a little more detail about ex-gay ministries. My mom, personally, I know, she's not really the far right wing, but she's a big believer in those. Unfortunately, I can't bring her here today, but I haven't heard specific first-hand accounts. Just read stories about people being scammed and screwed over. So.
Yeah. Why do you have to hold me to something that I said at the beginning of the presentation? I hoped you'd forget. It's really tough sometimes to talk about ex-gay stuff because I have a number of friends who are in the ex-gay movement. And the minute, I said earlier, if you say, I didn't choose to feel this, and I say, yes, you did, then I'm calling you a liar, right? So if you ask me, can gay people become straight? And I say no, and then somebody says, well, I did, then I'm calling them a liar. If I say yes, even if I say yes, but it's rare, then everybody tends to turn to all the gay people and say, see, you can, you just have to have faith. And it's very, very frustrating as a gay Christian to be constantly told if you had enough faith, then you would become straight. It's like in the book of Job. Job is cursed with all this stuff because God and Satan have this bet going. And then, we know the story. The first 2 chapters and the last chapter, God and Satan have this debate, and then then God allows Satan to curse Job with all these things, and then Job is faithful, and so in the end, God restores his fortunes. But that skips the whole rest of the book, which is like 39 chapters that get skipped, which are all about Job's friends coming and sitting with him and saying to him, at first, hey, we love you, we want to support you, and then, hey, you know that if you trusted God and repented of your sin, then God would take this stuff away. And he says, well, I've trusted God, and there's not any sin I have left to repent of. And they say, well, clearly there is, because look what you're going through. And he's like, no, there's not. And they're like, well, clearly there is. And they spent 39 chapters berating him, saying, look, God wouldn't let this happen to you unless there was some sin he was trying to root out of your life. And at the end of the book, God says, hey, Job's friends, you're stupid. Or that's a paraphrase, I think. But that's how it felt to me often, being told, yeah, you just have to try harder to become straight. So the thing about the ex-gay movement is I know a lot of really wonderful Christians who are very loving and very well-meaning who have gone into the ex-gay movement hoping to become straight, and it doesn't happen. And there are a lot of stories that are really tragic, and I don't even really know sometimes whether to talk about them or not, because on the one hand, I think it's important for people to know that this stuff happens, but on the other hand, I don't want to be seen as, I don't know, I don't want to heap more abuse on people who have already been through so much, But one very public example, when I was in college and I was going through all this for the first time, and a lot of Christians kept saying to me, it's true, you can become straight. And I was saying, well, look, I've been through a lot of these programs and I've just not seen it happen. A lot of people would say, well, I can prove it. Look at John Polk. John Polk was, at the time, the poster boy of the ex-gay movement. He was the most famous ex-gay in the world. He was the chairman of the board of Exodus International, which is the largest ex-gay organization in the world. He was the homosexuality specialist for Focus on the Family. He was the one who wrote letters to Focus on the Family subscribers saying, I am living proof that gay people can change. He wrote a book called Not Afraid to Change, in which he didn't actually specifically say, I have become straight, but he strongly implied it. He talked about meeting his wife and having a kid and all of that. And John Polk, over and over and over and over and over and over again, was the example given to me as the definitive proof that gay people can become straight. It was in, I think, 2000 that John was on a business trip in DC, and a couple of gay activists found him at a gay bar, apparently, according to witnesses, buying a man a drink. And somebody came in and took some photos of John, which he rushed out of the bar, and the story broke. And at first, John said that he had gone to the bar to use the bathroom because he didn't know it was a gay bar. And he later admitted that that wasn't true. But he said he didn't have any ulterior motive, any poor motive in going there. He just was curious. But he hadn't told anybody back home that he was going to be there. And John was removed from his position at Exodus, but was kept on as the homosexuality specialist for Focus on the Family. And a year later, when James Dobson wrote his book, Bringing Up Boys, he still cited John Paul as the definitive proof that gay people can change. He also offered on that same page a quote from a Christian psychologist saying that gay people can change. And the psychologist's name was George Riekers, which some of you may remember a year or two ago was the guy who found a lot of controversy when he hired a rent boy to carry his luggage when he was on a trip. So, okay, it's tough because it's like you talk about these things and people kind of giggle and stuff. At the same time, it's like I feel really bad for these folks. And I know so many stories of people who genuinely believed they were becoming straight and they married somebody of the opposite sex, and then things fell apart at some point when they realized that they weren't actually becoming straight. One of the things that bothers me the most, well, I should probably finish up my answer to this question, or we'll have only one question, but one of the things that bothers me the most in a lot of ex-gay groups is that, well, I was on stage earlier this year with Alan Chambers, the president of Exodus, and I said, Alan, people are not becoming straight, and people think that Exodus and other ex-gay groups are offering to help them become straight. And Alan very frankly said, and you can find this on YouTube, honestly, 99.9% of people who go through Exodus and who I've met who've gone through these programs have not become straight. That's what Alan said. Alan maintains that Exodus doesn't promise that people can become straight, that Exodus, is just trying to help people cope with their temptations. But most Christians I've talked to who aren't very familiar with the inner workings of Exodus believe that what Exodus and other groups offer is to help gay people become straight. And a lot of parents push their kids into Exodus and Exodus-affiliated programs because that's what they believe that is going to happen. And it just doesn't happen. So, other questions? Yeah.
Bearing in mind that gender and sexuality are very different, do you guys do work with transgender people?
We do. We have a trans community within GCN. We have a lot of communities within the larger community. We have an online community at GCN with over 20,000 registered members, and so it's a lot of people who all have very different needs. One of the groups that we have that it's not visible until you register. You can register on the site and it's free. But all the small groups are not visible until you register, and one of them is a trans group. And in spite of the name Gay Christian Network, actually, trans issues are very important to us, very important to me personally. So, I'm not trans, but one of my best friends is. So, I just realized after I said very important to me personally, people might be like, "Is he trans?" I don't know, but one of my best friends is trans, and many years ago, he allowed me to ask a lot of very, very personal questions because there was a lot I didn't understand, and that was really helpful to me. And so I know that there are a lot of other folks in the LGBT community as well as in the broader Christian community who don't understand a lot of this stuff and kind of need to understand. And so both education and support are important to me. Thanks. Yeah.
I know that the answer may be too long to answer, but I would really like to know because you said that you were really into the whole youth group kind of thing when you're in high school and things like that. What was it that you did to try and feel better about yourself whenever you finally did accept the fact that you were gay?
To try to feel better about myself?
Yeah, as far as being a Christian and being gay.
I've never been asked that question before. That's an interesting question.
Because I have people that I know very personally that feel that because they're a Christian, that even though they know that they are gay, that they beat themselves up constantly for it.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what would be a good approach on trying to feel better about yourself and stop fighting it so much.
For me, one of the most important things was connecting with other Christians who understood what I was going through, which is one of the reasons that a lot of LGBT Christians seek out other LGBT Christians, is to try to not feel so alone. Fellowship is important. I mean, all of us as Christians understand that fellowship is important. We meet in church regularly because we believe that fellowship is important. It's challenging. You know, a lot of folks have walked away from their faith, and I was saying last night that one of my good friends the other day was saying to me that he doesn't like being. He doesn't like spending time with the sort of people who like going to church, even though he's the sort of person who likes going to church. And what he meant by that was, you know, when he finds out that somebody is a committed Christian, even though he's a committed Christian, he's had so many bad experiences with Christians that as soon as somebody comes out to him as a Christian, he's kind of like, oh, again, you know? And I totally got where he was coming from. Sometimes we Christians are our own worst enemy. And there's a whole thing I could say about that, but I'm not going to for time. But for me, remembering that my faith is in God and not in the people of the church to be infallible, spending time in the scriptures, and remembering that there are other passages in the Bible besides the handful that get most often quoted on debates about homosexuality. And also having a chance to spend time with Christians who would allow me to spend time with them as a Christian and not talk about my sexuality. Sometimes it seems that a lot of folks, when you're gay, they either want to talk about the sexuality question all the time, or they don't want to ever talk about it. And it's like, you know, sometimes I want to talk about it, and sometimes I don't want to talk about it. And sometimes I just want to know that you're my friend, and we don't need to talk about theological questions. We can just talk about, you know, that cool movie that we both just saw that was really awesome. I don't know what it was. I haven't seen any awesome movies lately, but so I think having Christian fellowship that's, you know, that's accepting in that sense. And this is not what you asked, but I'll just add one more coda onto that. A lot of times when LGBT Christians talk about wanting to feel welcomed and accepted, there are kind of two different things that those terms can mean. One of them is, if you're a side A, say you're a side A gay Christian, and as a reminder, side A are those folks who support same-sex marriage, same-sex relationships. If you're a side A gay Christian, there's a sense in which, for obvious reasons, you may want to go to a church, be part of a Christian fellowship that is also side A. In the same way that any of us as Christians would want to be in churches and in Christian fellowship with folks who share our theological beliefs. And so that is part of it. But also, I hear often from LGBT Christians that they're like, look, I want to be welcomed, which does not mean that this group needs to affirm all of my theological views or agree with all of my theological views. I just want to know that I can come in the door and I can sit down, and not just that people aren't going to actively antagonize me, but more than that people will actively welcome and embrace and love me and get to know me for me, and not ask me to shut up and never talk about my sexuality, but also not make it the focus, and just be part of the church, you know? When one of the reasons I love Tony Campolo so much was Tony is side B. He does not approve of same-sex marriage. His wife Peggy is side A. And the two of them travel sometimes and speak about how they're able to lovingly disagree as very high-profile Christians. And they came to speak at my school when I was a student there. And I knew about this, and I was really excited to meet him because of these talks that they do. And so I said to Tony, so he was waiting to speak, and I walked up to him because I was like, I'm going to introduce myself to him before he goes up to speak, and there were all these students going around. So I walked up to him, and I'm like, Dr. Campolo, my name is Justin Lee, and I am on the exec board for the Gay Straight Alliance on campus, and I was going to say, and I'm also a member of the Christian Fellowship here, we're speaking, and I'm, you know, blah, 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 blah. I didn't get that far. I just got to tell him that I was part of the, actually I think I said the gay student group, because at that time it really wasn't much of a straight alliance. So I said, I'm part of the gay student group here on campus, and that was all I said. His response to me was, I am so glad you're here. And he gave me a big hug, and it was the first time in my life after I came out as gay. It was the first time that a straight man, not related to me, gave me a hug. And it blew me away. And then he said, then I sort of got out, oh, well, also I'm a Christian and part of this group, and he said, well, I'd love to hear about what that experience has been like for you. Here, come sit down. Walked away from this like 150 other students. I'm sure they were like, but anyway. Walked away from this like 150 other students, and we sat down in the corner, and for like 5 minutes he just let me talk about my experience, and he just listened. And he didn't ask me, are you having sex? Are you in a relationship? Do you plan to be in a relationship? Do you agree that homosexual sex is sinful? He didn't ask me any of that. He just let me share my story and showed me love. And that is what Christian welcome feels like. I want to do more Q&A, but I think that we're out of time, so I should let you all go. But thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your time and for your questions. And I will continue to hang out and chat more as long as people want to, come up and talk or whatever. If you want to give me your email address, and I'll send you DVDs and resources and stuff. There, you can sign up on any of the sign-up sheets in the back. And thanks. Have a good evening.
We'd just like to thank the GSA and the Voice group. We'd like to thank all of you for coming here tonight, and we'd like to thank you for coming. And have a good night.